We nice continued conversation that we are having. We have a fantastic conversation the last time in preparation for this meeting, but now it's the time that we should start. I'm seeing that we have already a large group, and it's in Chicago. It's 12:05. So, in respect to everybody, in the time we're gonna start. So, welcome everybody to the event today, and we are gonna now officially start our event. And let me first go through some quick introduction. Hi, I'm Carlos Teixeira, faculty and director of the Action Lab at IIT Institute of Design, usually known as ID. Welcome to the third event in our 2021 Leyen lectures. Before we get started, just a bit about us here at ID and the annual Leyen series, in case you are joining for the first time, those series. The Institute of Design is known for pioneering human-centered design and systems design. And we are the first to introduce the PhD in design in the US. But we are more than a graduate school. We are an institute, an international community of learners and practitioners focused on building the future with principle and purpose, which is going to be the main focus of our discussion today. This series is named for Richard Leyen, who studied design at IIT in the 1940s. He was a director of the design at Raymond Loews, and later pioneered the area of product planning and strategic design. Leyen was interested in using design to make a strategic impact and believed that the principles of design should be the core of business planning. To discuss the role of design in business planning today, we're going to have the panel, and our panel today is going to focus on putting purpose at the core of strategy. I'm thrilled to welcome Michela Magas and Thomas Malnight to our discussion today. Both of you connect strongly to the idea of purpose in your recent work. So I'm going to ask if the two of you can do a quick introduction, introduce yourself, and tell us about your work. And as you're talking about your current work and your background, can you also talk about how can purpose drive organization success? This will be kind of the introduction, and then we can have an interesting discussion around that. I want to encourage the participants to submit questions. I highly suggest that I would like to channel you to submit questions, not through the chat, but through the question and answers. We have people monitoring the question and answers, and we're going to bring them at the end for a discussion from those questions. So please use the question and answer for submitting questions that we'll be addressing. So again, Michela and Thomas, if you could give an introduction of yourself and how can purpose drive organization success? I'm going to start with Michela, please.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm Michela Magas. I'm chair of the Industry Commons Foundation, and I'm CEO of MTF Labs, which is a global platform for nearly 8,000 innovators now from all kinds of areas of expertise and from across the world. My background is in the Royal College of Art, so I'm a designer by profession, but I also am very, very honored to sit on President von der Leyen's high-level roundtable for the new European Bauhaus, and I'm an advisor on policy to the, an expert advisor to the European Innovation Council and to CERN in Switzerland, and to various policy groups and governments. So I am in a very unusual situation of being able to translate grassroots experimentation that is based from design practice and from creative practice into high-level policy. So rather unusual as a sort of career trajectory. Back in the day, I studied design communications and I straddled design products and ended up working on design futures for the likes of Apple, Nike, Nokia, Pearson, Financial Times, those types of large organizations actually for many years. This would be a normal career trajectory from a designer. Also regularly contributed to academia, so Goldsmiths at the University of London, so design critical practice, design entrepreneurship, design products at the Royal College of Art, and also founded something called creative computing, or co-authored something called creative computing at the University of London back in, I think, 2005, when everybody thought that was an oxymoron. How could you have creative computing? And I think it's a bit clearer now as to why that was there. And still there, actually. And very early on, in working with both clients and communities of students, postgraduates mainly, and colleagues from design and from all kinds of other fields, I realized that one of the best things you can possibly do is bring people from completely different backgrounds into a space of common understanding, and usually united by a common purpose. I mean, this is where your purpose comes in. And this was way before your sort of networking kind of high, and before sort of the whole data connected. Oh, it existed already, but we're talking quite a long time ago. And I already set out to start to think, how can I create enabling tools and methods to facilitate and stimulate these environments, and basically, putting innovative technologies into the hands of amazing, brilliant minds when they come together, or creating systems for attribution, for instance, in the physical space, tracking intellectual property, those types of things. So already sort of 10 years ago, created something called Open Product Licenses with support from CERN and Innovate UK, which actually was attributing, it's a system for attribution and building on the shoulder of your peers in the physical space, which was not governed by any of those types of agreements. And if you'd asked me then, would this take me to this journey of advising to the G7 or to President von der Leyen or the governments, I would have probably laughed, because it certainly wasn't what I had in mind. But of course, now we run this global innovator community. It's approaching 8,000 members. We are about to run our 20th innovation lab in Portugal. And we always have these big missions that drive everything that we do. And so basically that connects to your idea of purpose. It completely changes the game. It completely elevates the thinking, and it stops people from sort of looking too close and getting bothered by things that are sort of perhaps trivial in comparison to grand missions. And it always works. It is always a fantastic way to build momentum. And then from this, the idea of Industry Commons grew as a series of enablers for cross-domain industry collaboration. And again, we are applying the same thinking, the same methodology, and it's really, really gathered momentum with large industry players across the world. Actually, our advisors are from the US, for example. So that's where I'm at the moment.
Great, thank you. Congratulations on your work, and I'm a big fan of what I have seen. And I would like to expand today a little bit on the conversation. Thomas, do you? One of the things is that you have written an article for the Harvard Business Review, and it's great that we have that over there and we can all read, but it would be nice for you also to kind of give us a summary of that article, the impact that it had and where you are now. But give us some background, the work that you're doing now, and discuss purpose, given that you have written about that.
First of all, I'm probably the oddball out in this whole discussion because I am a professor of strategy. I'm not a professor of design. I'm not a professor of innovation. I'm coming from strategy. But for me, what strategy is strategy what actually shapes actions and decisions inside of a company over time. I don't care about pieces of paper. What shapes what they do. And for me, in this regard, innovation is an enabler. Because innovation is a critical enabler kind of in shaping the direction of a company that's going forward. But one of the key questions that companies face today is essentially what shapes the questions that they ask through the innovation process. And if you look at the strategies of most companies, the strategy is really, it's kind of like stuck in the past for many companies. It's very much about how do I maintain or how do I incrementally grow this existing product or this market and things like that. And our focus on purpose really came from some research we did on high growth companies. We were looking at companies that were growing faster. And what we saw was that these companies do is they ask different questions. And purpose essentially allows the organization or challenges the organizations to ask different questions. Because whereas typically companies say, okay, here's what I'm already doing. How do I get a little bit better at this product? Or how do I get a little bit better in this market? There's much bigger questions that they ask. And what we found in our research is that, by asking different sets of questions, particularly about things like purpose, what you really do is you take the company from an inside out today forward view to an outside in future back perspective. And that's where you see what the opportunities are. Essentially, from a strategy point of view, purpose is about how does an organization create impact, impact on others, impact on the world, impact on communities. And the logic of purpose here is really, how do I identify where are their needs, where are their opportunities, and how do I focus on serving those as opposed to being trapped in the business from the past? We know for a fact, growth does not come today from kind of fighting for market share in old traditional industries or old traditional markets or adding this feature on here. Growth comes from creating markets, growth comes from creating impact. But then the question from an innovation point of view is, how do you get the organization to ask fundamentally different sets of questions? How do you get the organization to open its eyes and also to break its rules about how it works to create the opportunity for this kind of innovation that we're talking about? So for us, purpose is very much about, it really is focusing on asking a different set of questions to create the future based on where there's future growth, as opposed to protecting the past by incrementally thinking. So for us, purpose really is about why an organization exists, and it's really about where we can create impact. But by focusing on that impact, it's also about where do I grow? And what we know in our research by doing this is that, again, it's not about kind of defining your traditional way of operating, your traditional market. Companies, when they're talking about transforming today and the innovation agendas they're creating today strategically, they're fundamentally redefining what business they're in. And we'll talk later about some examples about, how pet food companies become pet health companies, become pets in society companies as sources of growth, or how the tractor companies focus on farming and sustainable nutrition to create their future. And I can go industry by industry, but it really is about how does a company start to ask different questions to open up different opportunities to redefine what its playing field is, what its value proposition is, what its relationship is with its people inside and its stakeholders outside in order to grow. So that's where my interest in is, because what we found is that only by putting purpose at the core of strategy do we get these companies asking these different questions, and then focusing much more on long-term opportunities as opposed to short-term budgets. So that's where my background comes from.
Great, wonderful. What intrigues me on just on that introduction is the fact that Michela is presenting to us that diversity is a great asset that we need to leverage, and bringing a very diverse group of people together is a way of changing things and innovating, having different perspective. But we have to have purpose as something that brings everybody together. So diversity has all kinds of complexity, but bringing them together through purpose is essential. But what is interesting from what you're saying, Thomas, is that you're basically saying that yeah, we can get together, but we also should be mindful that purpose can be reframed and should be reframed. It's not something that is given or taken for granted. So we don't bring a group only when we already have a purpose. We might have to work through the idea of redefining the purpose. So this notion of bringing very diverse group of people together and reframing, it seems that it's a fascinating space also for design.
Yes.
I would like to open up the discussion now that we have done a quick introduction, is that for the discussion today, I'd like to focus on 3 topics during the discussion. One is about defining purpose. So we started that discussion and we to expand that. And the other one is about creating value. It's about growth. So defining purpose is something that has intentionality and has goals, and we are all motivated by those achievements. But business is always looking for growth and for the creation of value. But we also are recognizing that there are multiple stakeholders that should be involved in that discussion, not only from the point of view of diversity, but also because they are different stakeholders. So I'd like to discuss also the role of the commons in all this. Thomas, you already talked, but if you can expand a little bit more about reframing questions in order to move away from incremental increase in market share and move towards real sizable gains. How can an organization do this?
I mean, first of all, let's recognize that in many organizations, there's 2 different ways we have purpose today. I mean, a lot of organizations, purpose is just words on a wall. So basically, there's what I say versus what I do. And those 2 things are a tremendous source of cynicism and skepticism, and they should be. You know, what we found is that purpose does not come from a company hiring an advertising firm to come up with a nice logo, or it doesn't come from an executive sitting in a room for a couple of days kind of being creative about what they're going to come up with. You know, purpose comes from inside of an organization, actively designing, looking at its organization, listening to its people, listening to the strength and ideas of its people, and that coming together. You know, we work with lots of top leadership teams, but also with their organizations below. And what we've found is that all of the good ideas for what the purpose should be comes from inside of the organization. They do not come from outsiders like us or outsiders who come in. It comes from listening to and engaging the organization and letting them go. But let me give you a couple of examples about where framing questions become different. And I mentioned before kind of this idea of tractors. You know, if I'm a tractor company, where am I going to grow? Am I going to grow by adding a couple new features, or am I going to grow by entering a new market? I mean, that's got nothing to do with growth. I mean, where is there a need and where is the opportunity? The first place is that right now, just think about the challenges facing farmers. Think about, what does rural prosperity mean? I mean, go to a country like India. You know, how much money can a small scale farmer make by operating in a very difficult environment there? I mean, the value of a tractor is not just a physical piece. It's actually, how do I enable and empower efficient farming? If I get an organization asking the question of how do I enable and empower efficient farming, that's fundamentally different than if I add the question of how do I make a better tractor? Or even taking it further, what's one of the bigger issues that's facing the world today is sustainable nutrition in the long term. What if I have an organization that looks at how can I as a company impact sustainable nutrition going forward? How do I get my people, how do I get my organization asking that different kind of question? Then you're tapping in not only to the passion of the individuals in the organization, but also where there's fundamental needs and where they can have impact over time. So, you know, we can go through, in getting the top leadership team to ask these different sets of questions, engaging the organization and asking these questions and exploring these questions. That's where we see kind of this transformational identity, reframing of the question. And that's where they need their innovators then. Because even if I start asking these questions inside of organizations, how do we free up the energy to ask these different questions? And how do I free up the ideas? How do I create the momentum? How do I build on what strengths I have, but look at it in a very different lens? That's where we see the interesting challenges from innovation today. And that's where we see the growth coming from companies.
Great. Thank you. And I want to link now this notion of the reframing and purpose to understand what is the role of innovation. And this is a question that I would like to bring to Michela. What is the role of innovation in creating new value? Especially we'd like to understand that from the perspective of the commons, because I think that one thing is to think about the company and how they are seeing growth opportunities and they are looking for new needs and new spaces where they can innovate. But a lot of the challenges that we face today requires innovation that are more systemic, that go beyond just one company. So, for example, sustainable nutrition, as Thomas was saying, is something that, yes, one company can address that, but probably we need multiple companies and also from different sectors. We might need people from government. We might need people from the nonprofit organizations. The notion of commons is something that now it's on a key factor when we're discussing innovation. So, Michela, you have been working a lot with this notion of commons, and if you could expand a little bit from what Thomas was saying, from the role of companies on creating innovation and value, if you can bring that discussion into the commons.
Yeah, sure. So the idea of the commons and also, the core idea of the new European Bauhaus is about bringing cross-domain knowledge into together to solve grand challenges, because there's absolutely no way that you can do it from one single domain. So there's idea of multiple perspectives. And there's a real kind of a misunderstanding when you bring things together into the space of the commons, as though this will create everything, turn all of the knowledge into a sort of giant soup. And that you will be able to make sense of. And one of the biggest, most important things to solve in the space of the commons is about how do you create really conducive ways of knowledge transfer between the different components, the different elements, different perspectives that are coming into it, and create an ecosystem of understanding. Because then you're able to, and then you have to do that in a way that doesn't cancel each other out. Because every single domain that brings the knowledge into the commons is incredibly important, and their knowledge is the thing that brings the value, right? But once you have a system that really is able to create a system of understanding between different values in the commons, and when we work with data, of course, we are talking about the data commons. We are talking about data from different domains. So in that sense, interoperability comes into it in a big way. Is how do you generate systems that can do this and bring the knowledge in the same space? Then it's a case of how do you then address the sort of questions that Thomas has been talking about? And of course, what's wonderful in the space of the commons is that when you do have a space of common understanding, you can bring all those diverse thinkers into it, and they can raise questions from their own perspective, and they can reframe the question from their point of view. And so you get this multiple reframings, and they really open up your eyes to the different aspects of the problem. And why is this particularly important? And for instance, why are designers particularly good at being part of that space? Obviously, as a designer, one is trained to interrogate subject matter from different perspectives. That is a method. It is ingrained in every designer. And designers often underestimated themselves in the past, I felt, because they felt that science was something that was categorical and always true, and design was slightly whimsical in the sense that you could choose the point of view, or you could use interpretation. But in truth, a rigorous designer or a rigorous creative practitioner has a very, very strong method that's incredibly important right now in these spaces of the commons where we're trying to tackle those issues, particularly where we are faced with frontier technologies. So for instance, where the frontier technologies are creating unknown unknowns, so results which you could not anticipate, you cannot build on what we call prior art in science. You cannot build based on deductive or inductive. So deductive being logical and inductive being statistical results, right? What you need to do is actually, when you're facing with unknown unknowns, you need to interrogate it from as many perspectives as possible to illuminate the subject matter and to generate knowledge. And so designers and creative practitioners and anyone who's trained, so for instance, the sort of executives that Thomas might train would have that capacity to interrogate their market, to interrogate their innovation capabilities from all of these different perspectives. And this is why, I like to see design education, in particular at postgraduate level, to actually be exposed to more cross-domain collaboration in this sense. For instance, to collaborate with business schools and with those use cases, because they have the skills and they have the mental training to contribute to generating more knowledge and more value for the commons in that sense. So there is another aspect to this that perhaps we can also touch upon, which is that bringing people into this space to work together, it tends to kind of, we call it sort of an acupuncture in personal development, because the amount of knowledge that's exchanged and the amount of personal growth that's possible is astounding. This is why we've been running it for 9 years now, and this is what really encourages us to go forward, because the personal transformations that we witness are phenomenal. And this is also why this model is so, it has been recognized at high level European policy as being incredibly important for engaging grassroots communities. Because really, from my perspective, when I kind of speak on behalf of NEB or speak to NEB, if we can get each person who contributes to this space of common understanding to up their development, to take one step forward in their personal development, we have an enormous societal transformation. It's huge. So this is what sort of the idea of the commons brings, I think, there's a couple of perspectives on that.
You started to touch base on design, and I'm very excited and very glad that we are starting to talk about the role that design play in all that. And you talk one of the areas of competencies and expertise that designers can bring into that. But I'd like to ask both of you, how have you seen the role of system design? So I think that we have traditionally talked about the most separate practices like service design, industrial design, product design, communication design, and UX very recently. But now there is a lot of conversation that the things that need to be designed are more system oriented. And so there's several conversations, at least in design education, about systems design and thinking about the commons, thinking about large-scale collaborations. Can you talk about what have you seen? And it would be interesting to get the two perspectives, because we are talking from one side, Michela, that it's in the design field operating at the high level with policymakers and leaders. And Thomas, you're working at the corporate level, not coming from a design perspective. So if you can talk a little bit of what have you seen from the role of design in terms of systems?
Okay. Let me start off on the corporate side, because then you can build on the details of it and on the important parts of it later. I mean, one of the biggest things that we see is, you have to understand, leadership teams feel trapped, because leadership teams themselves don't have, they're expected to deliver on a regular basis. And one of the things is how do you give them the space to think differently, to innovate? And it's systemic, because it's not just in one area. Innovation we're talking about here is not just in one area. And one of the challenges, actually one of the key opportunities we see, is that we also see a passion inside of organizations for people to think differently, but they're never given the time or the space in order to do so. So our experience working with companies is, first of all, you've got to get a license to think differently by an organization. So how do you get a top leadership team to say, these are 5 or 6 areas that we want to completely challenge our thinking? And these could be areas like, for example, what does it really mean to put data at the center of strategy? Or what does it really mean to be consumer need centric? Lifetime, focusing on meeting a lifetime needs of a consumer or a societal area. What does it mean to kind of rethink our business model completely in terms of how we operate and create this space? And identifying a set of fundamental questions which really shape the organization, and then bringing together a team of executives who really have a belief in the company but want to challenge and change. And what we do with those executives is we go through a phase which we call divergence. Divergence means that they have to assume that they're fired from their company, go off and learn from other industries, other companies, look at other examples, really think completely differently about these key topics. And how do we open up the space for people in an organization themselves, in teams, whatever, to really ask these different sets of questions and come back with these different points of view, but not from the point of view of my company now, what am I going to do, but understanding where the opportunities exist. And then in our interaction, we go through, after divergence is really about opening the mind, convergence is really then about, okay, let's stretch what that could mean for us. If we took the best examples we see in these other areas, other industries, if we really apply them back to our organization, what would that mean we could do or should do in terms of making this go forward? And how do you actually do this with people in the organization to open up their minds, to engage them as part of their personal development? But also, how do we use it then to both challenge, inspire, and create an aspiration for the organization, for the leadership team of the organization as well? So this idea of identifying the big issues, reframing around specific questions, creating an opportunity to learn and explore elsewhere, and then using those lenses to come back and fundamentally challenge where a company itself is going. And that's where we see these opportunities arising. And it's huge opportunities for personal development. It's also very strong challenges to the leadership team because they're not used to being challenged by people in their own organization. They're not used to having the space to explore because they're all focusing on execution. So this idea of creating these topics, creating this ability to explore, to frame questions in different ways, to bring that back together then and challenge where a company itself is going, that's where we see this opportunity of really addressing these issues. So I'd be interested now in Michela, from your side, how do you see them doing this?
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, system design is absolutely crucial, and so a really holistic approach to system design. And to me, it's actually hugely surprising that in design education, we don't have those channels and those directions where students could evolve those particular skills. I think it's such a huge field, and particularly at this point in time, but also I think in terms of how the systems evolve, because everything is data-driven systems now. I mean, just to illustrate that point, years ago we were working with the creative industries and with the music industry, which was the first one to nosedive after the advent of Napster. So the whole sector had to reinvent itself, and it was a sort of big shock. It was sent shockwaves to the whole kind of music industry. And we were saying, we were working on solutions for this and the new sort of systems. And we were saying, well, this is going to happen to all other industries in the next few years. And people were saying, are you nuts? I mean, how could this be? How could this apply to mining or chemistry? Mm-hmm. And 2 years ago, I think it was around 2 years ago now, SAP in Switzerland actually published this brochure that said, well, we can now manage the entire production process of the chemical industry from start to finish through data-driven systems. And the chemical industry turned around and went, wait, you are saying that you own the tools of production? And wait, are we now content? Right? So, I mean, this is something that, if you are aware of systems and how systems operate, you are able to tell them beforehand that this is actually coming and that they're not seeing it. And this is a very, very interesting use case, for example. But this is what inspired me to build the Industry Commons model, because it required a holistic perspective. So it's not just a case of bringing everybody in the space of the commons. What are we building commons on? What is the ground that we're building them on? So if it's data driven, we are building it on layers of societal parameters. So ethics, corporate social responsibility, responsible AI, sustainability, layer, parameters that you need to respect, that need to be embedded into the system. Any regulation that comes out of that, any kind of legal, so not just regulation, governmental regulation, but legal agreements, IP tracking, attribution, and then of course the financial horizontal sort of layer that's already working extremely well in certain countries, like in Sweden, where I'm based, where it is completely seamless and everything's virtual. We've eliminated cash. Actually, I haven't seen a banknote since 2015. So I mean, these systems are already hugely integrated, and then you build interoperability, like real interoperability through what we are currently building with ontology. So we're creating an ontology ecosystem with across industries. And then once you have the interoperability at that level, not just through application programming interfaces or application protocols, but actually properly embedded in the technology, you can then start to build innovation on top of this that is fully trackable and traceable, so that the big players can start to follow where their assets are traveling to, which potential new markets are opening, or as part of a system of the commons. But it's built on societal values, right? And I was saying to Thomas the other day when we sort of met, was that I was actually working on enterprise integration. And enterprise integration brings this holistic perspective, the business perspective as a driver of building ICT systems inside companies. And of course, as a designer, I go into enterprise integration. I have to relearn how to express myself, because I am entering a particular group of researchers, a sort of a global community of researchers who rely very much on mathematical modeling. Perhaps more sort of in the way that architects may work with construction engineers, and lots of architects are trained in construction engineering, so they do have the two sides of the brain working together. And in this, I have to do that. I have to actually go over to the other language, the other way of expressing myself as a designer, and to learn how to publish within the International Journal of Production Research, for example, with all of the conventions that are part of that, and straddle disciplines. But it's worth it, because the perspective that I can bring in as a system designer actually can inspire the researchers very much for new research directions that are perhaps purpose-driven, that are perhaps a business management or new business model driven. And that can actually have a slightly broader perspective and broader range of application. So quite a different, it creates quite a difference, I think.
I'd like to raise one more question before we open for addressing the questions from the audience. And this is a very personal question that I have the two of you. It's a personal question because I strongly believe that the transformation that we are talking about, the transformation where we are trying to realize a more sustainable and actable future, is something that depends on the market forces. I strongly believe that those are at a scale, as Michela has been talking about, that is requires the commons, requires multi-stakeholders working at the system level. It also requires what Thomas is saying, for organizations to think beyond products and service and understand that they have to now look entire demands and needs and opportunities, growth opportunities, entire systems, where they are designing entire systems to make that transformation. So I think there is an alignment in a common direction that everybody's taking here. But my question is, what are those infrastructures that we're going to be designing in the future? In your opinion, if you also agree that the transformation is going to be market-driven, and if organizations and from multiple sectors are the ones that are going to drive those transformations into a more sustainable and actable future, what actually are we talking about? What are the infrastructures that need to be designed in that way, that are market-driven and based on organizations looking for growth opportunities?
Who wants to go? Michelle, want to go first, Michela?
Oh, no, I'm just, go for it.
Okay.
No worries.
Because for me, let's just talk about data as an example, because no company owns all the data today. But as we were talking about, data is at the core of what we're doing. And let me take another industry example just to kind of show that. Let's take an insurance industry. And how do they use data today? I mean, they're supposedly experts in risk, right? So, but the trouble, what they do with data today is they use risk in order to say yes or no to a policy, where they say, this is the price for the policy. So the data is used very much internally. You know, if you think about the innovation within the insurance company, they affect people's lives. You know, they affect people's ability to live a life, to live a full life, to do different areas. And what's the data that they need in order to really kind of use risk to, as opposed to using it as an internal protection, as an internal pricing mechanism, really about this idea of empowering life, empowering people to live their lives. Because that does take information and data from many different places to work together. But it also takes a company itself redefining what it does. I don't sell insurance. I basically enable and empower lives. You know, and because I touch people and I affect them every day. I mean, how do I use risk not to say no to an insurance policy for somebody who's a cancer survivor or is taking other kind of risks? How do I actually empower my life by helping them do that? I can use my expertise combined with data from multiple sources to allow a cancer survivor to have new opportunities to live, or other areas, or open up communities. You know, companies, if they actually look at data in a different way, I don't use it internally, I don't use it for budgeting, I don't use it for performance measurement, but rather I use it to say, how can I connect with other data, and how can I be part of the system that really enables growth, enables impact, but doing it in a way that's not just it's the long term. The growth is going to come from how I impact the society in a long-term way. How can I enable people to live in a different way? That's where the long-term growth is going to come from. And that takes this infrastructure of working together, but it also fundamentally takes the view of, how do I fit into a data network that has a purpose of enabling life as opposed to managing my short term? And the infrastructure to cooperate together with other organizations, to create communities, to focus on the need of where the opportunity is, to focus on not just an individual need, but a societal need, creating the infrastructure that enables that to happen. That's where the growth and excitement comes from for a company, because that's where they're going to grow. That's where they'll see the opportunities.
It's interesting to think about insurance as an infrastructure.
It is
fascinating.
It can be, shouldn't it be? It has
Yeah.
to be. It's not just it's not a prevention business. It's not a protection business. It's an anticipation business. It's a business about creating opportunity, not limiting risk. That's what happens.
And do you see, this is where, for instance, all of the enabling horizontal layers of the industry commons that I mentioned earlier are actually an infrastructure, because they support innovation at the top, right? So one of the, for instance, things that you can really connect to this idea of insurance being an infrastructure is that you would want in that sort of system, and providing we can solve the environmental impact of decentralized systems, which are of course far more agile and allow for the sort of partnerships in sharing the data that Thomas is alluding to. Providing you can solve that issue, you can embed of course micropayments, but you can also embed nanotaxation at the point of exchange. I mean, imagine just how much bureaucracy that reduces, and how much more agile that sort of infrastructure becomes. And this is what I keep telling people who are in heavy bureaucratic setups, that, you know, these things are already happening, and there are already things that are available to us that are far more agile. And the moment that you can save so much time and so much effort, like we've introduced the ADAS electronic agreement signatures in Europe, which is now a standard. You know, the moment you have these kinds of agile systems, your traditional bureaucracy will fall through the floor. And of course, the way that we want to make this happen is through design of systems that are that really seriously consider the transitions that we have to go through. Because if something falls through the floor, it would be ugly. it will be nasty because, of course, people lose jobs. What you want to do is actually really be aware of the agility of the new systems, introduce them as fast as possible, create far more agile and faster exchanges. And we are working towards something that I predict to be sort of in future the EU common data market. I mean, that's our main common platform that we are working towards. And all of these elements need to be built in order to support that. And this will apply not just in the virtual space and financial markets, for instance, which are operating in the virtual space, but actually in physical space. Because every one of your cities, every one of the sort of cultural happenings that are happening sort of in between your nodes and synapses of the data networks are actually data enabled now. Everything is it's pervasive, right? So it's actually culture driven, and the interaction that happens in physical spaces is lagging behind our paradigm. We've shifted on the web from the paradigm of having downloads and data delivery to having uploads and content creation as the main economic force, right? And in physical spaces, in cities, for instance, we haven't got there yet. And the innovation that can happen amongst communities. This is why we focus so much in the new European Bauhaus on the grassroots innovation in cities and in rural communities, because with this kind of new tools that are available, the potential for content creation innovation on the ground is phenomenal.
Just think about the consequence and cost that we're going to have because of not having the things that you guys are mentioning in terms of infrastructure related to the floods yesterday in New York, New Jersey, that the rain and the floods and what Michela is saying at the ground level, people struggling to deal with the floods and also trying to access the insurance. And that in a massive scale, that got everybody unprepared for something that was about 2 or 3 hours of rain in a way that they haven't seen. So those are things that are not futuristic. They are here. They are where nature and business and infrastructures are colliding. And it would be fascinating to see that, how we are going to start addressing that. I want to pass to the conversation to Gritsen Kicken, that is here to bring some of the questions on the Q&A so we can bring the audience into the conversation also.
Great. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to ask some questions that we've gotten from the Q&A here, and some of them are posed to specific folks on the panel here. So I think we'll start with the question about making sure that an organization's purpose is unique for that given organization and not generic to the whole industry category or sector where it belongs. And this was posed to you, Thomas.
I mean, first of all, again, there has to be a process for defining purpose. Purpose is not something that you hire an advertising company for executive. And purpose is basically looking at the root of a company inside and looking at where it can go. I mean, all of the work that we've done in terms of defining purposes starts internally, looks outside, and then defines something that is unique for the organization itself. I mean, if you go to Mars Pet, which is one example, I mean, their purpose is to make a better world for pets. Why? Because pets have a huge impact on individuals. Now, better world for pets, does that sound like something generic? It was something that came from them. And it came from the people inside of the organization about what drove them. And now if you look at what they're doing, they've gone from pet food, pet health, pet care, pets in cities, empowering pets, superpower dogs. They've taken that purpose, which is unique to them. And every time I go visit the company, I'm amazed at how much it's driving a new kind of an innovation, a new way of thinking. But that wouldn't have happened if they said, something generic on the outside. I can look at other companies as well. The power of purpose is when it's defined internally and it's believed internally, and it's used to align, motivate, and change a company for the long term. Only in those cases is it impactful. So the process of defining purpose, not taking it a generic on the wall, words on a wall, that's the key issue there. There is no such thing as a right purpose. You know, I go into an organization, every time I see it, I'm surprised by what purpose they come up with, but it comes through an engagement, a listening, and a looking outside in. It really looks at kind of where we can have an impact. That's where the defining purpose comes from, not from fancy words.
That's great. I have a question for you, Michela. This is, you know, it's true what this anonymous person has written here. You know, we live in an increasingly divided, politicized, climate change world. Discussions we're having here, oftentimes, you know, we are starting from the assumption that everyone is reasonable and agrees what is good or what should be. So ultimately, how do you deal with folks that you know, maybe may not share those same values? How do you, particularly with your experience, you know, working with the Commons and the new European Bauhaus, you know, how do you deal with these very distinct perspectives and interests?
Well, first of all perspectives and interests are really interesting and valuable to be brought to the table, and there's always reasons why they're there. For people who are kind of really rooted in their point of view of the world, which I suspect the person who's asking the question is probably referring to, it is usually the question of not being exposed to sufficient knowledge about others and about others' circumstances or situations. The best way usually is to place them into different circumstances, to expose them to different experiences. I mean, experiences are eye-openers, and this is where it is very, very difficult for a person to imagine something unless they have tried it. I'll give you an example of something. A lot of people have particular idea about disability. We work a great deal with accessibility, and we are incredibly, you know, inclusive. We're just radically inclusive. This is what we call it. We call it radical inclusion. We had, for instance, an example where we tested new types of systems, brain-computer interfaces, basically, with our labs. And we had some participants who were from the disability community, and we had a blind singer who's absolutely incredible. She's a vocal coach at the Sibelius Institute in Helsinki, in Finland. And we set up this system whereby it's actually based on, this is kind of a nice sort of thing, because it's about cross-disciplinary kind of reappropriation and reframing, like what we were saying before, which is, it was a system from clinical trials for people with anxiety attacks. So what happens is that you use neurofeedback to map out the onslaught of an attack. And usually the symptoms start before the person is aware of it. So what happens is, if you map it out for them, they're able to detect it early and start to train to control it. So this is what the system came from. What it was appropriated to is it was actually turned into a musical instrument, so that instead you could start to train to play music directly from your brain. And we then set it out. We got everybody in the lab from all these different disciplines to try and use it and to try and train their brain to do it. And it was taking about 2 hours for each person to do it. And then the blind singer put the neurofeedback sensor on, and she was able to do it instantly. She was able to go up and down a musical scale and use it instantly. Now, you could analyze as to why this is. You could look at her own personal talents or how her brain has evolved, but the upshot is that what we previously thought was a disabled person who cannot see the buttons to press in an operational environment or in an industrial environment because our tools have been designed in that way, right? In the era of brain-computer interfaces, she's far more talented than the rest of us. So where is the real ability here, right? This is the only way to open people's eyes up. So someone who has an attitude towards disability would have quite a different experience, I would say, in that environment.
What I like about the answer that you're giving here, Michela, and also on a lot of things that Thomas was saying before, is that the more complex we have, the more reframing we need, the more challenge we have, the more design we need. So the process of designing things, experimenting, prototyping, taking multiple point of views what Michela was saying before, this notion that sometimes until very recently, we will consider that designers were taking science and from science principles and kind of valid and developing solutions based on scientific information. And we are seeing now that design can open up entire new range of possibilities where science and all the other disciplines can play a fundamental role on coming up with appropriate solutions for them. But exploring the range of solutions is something that design can do. And I think that a lot of the discussion that we're having today, we see that there is a very high demand for design, given that all those things need to be explored, experimented, and have to consider that not everybody has a common purpose, not everybody has a rational thinking in the sense that we are all rational actors. We are not, all of us. And the same way that all of us are disabled and all of us are able to do things. So I think that the role that designers are going to play is very critical, but also designers need to be very ready for doing that. Kristen?
Yeah, so this is perfect segue into what will be our last question, which is really a combination of two questions that we have in the Q&A here. And this is for you, Carlos, because this really speaks to your area of expertise in systems design and design education and preparing students to be effective leaders. So what is, maybe you can just speak a little bit about design education today and more specifically, perhaps what ID is doing to prepare our students, in terms of preparing them with systems design skills and to be highly effective as they go out into the professional world and to, greet these complex challenges with creativity and ingenuity.
Well, I think there are two things that I want to highlight two things for the sake of time. One is the fact that design has worked in the past decades too much and for good reasons and with very good results and impact. Primarily focus on social science, understanding the human and the complexities of human, the environments, their connections and their interactions. So the whole area of human-centered design that has been created was in very strong alliance and partnership with the social science. I think that most of the challenges that we have today, they also have new actors far beyond just the humans and their needs and their specific situations. I think that we have actors that are natural actors and we have artificial actors such as our product and our taxation systems and things like that. So I think that we have a much more complex set of agents and that we are now interacting, we need to address. So I think that natural science needs to come back strongly to the design curriculum because people need to understand how the natural forces work and so that they can understand how to design solutions that address the particularities of the natural forces. So that's one thing that I strongly believe that we need in design. The other one is that when it comes to the connection between design and systems, I have seen a lot of conversations where designers appropriate systems thinking. So designers migrate from looking at products and service and the interactions and go to the cloud and think too much about the whole system. And they cannot talk about the products anymore. On the other side, I see a lot of system thinkers that can explain the systems very well, but they never consider the ground level systems, how things happen at the ground level where people live and where projects exist. So I think that design education can play a key role on leveraging the expertise of understanding the ground level of product, service, interactions, where things happen, and how they connect to the system level. I think that's the gap that exists today. is the connection between the ground level of things and the large scheme of things in terms of the system level. If we can connect and say how things exist in systems, I think that we will be much well prepared for addressing all those challenges. It's something that still needs to be done a lot. The good thing is that we designers know a lot about products, and there's a lot of understanding about systems and very strong about science, natural science. So it's just a matter of redesigning curriculum and learning experience that can integrate better those things.
Fantastic. So we are over time, so I'm just going to go ahead and thank everyone here and really appreciate you attending and engaging in the conversation. This is an excellent conversation. And just encourage everyone to join us for our upcoming events. Later in September, we have another event with ID faculty focused on discussing purpose yet again, profit versus purpose. And then in October, we have our last Latham talk for 2021, and that will be led by ID faculty member Laura Forlano, and will feature Kenneth Bailey and Marina Gorbis. So the details for those are on our website. You can register. We hope you will join us once again, and thank you to everyone for participating today.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michela, for a great conversation, and looking forward to interact with you in the future.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.